It's been more than 3 months since Russian tanks rolled into Ukraine, leveling parts of the country and disrupting the post-war world order in the process.
It's the most shocking moment for global security since the end of the Cold War.
From the risk to the global economy, to the looming nuclear threat, we ask our experts how the conflict has already changed the world and how its effects will be felt for years to come.
The rest of our lives are quite likely to be shaped by the consequences of this war.
I will never forget that moment at 3:30 in the morning when the telephone went by my bed and I had my deputy Ed Carr on the other line, and he simply said, "It's started." I think the world has been really fundamentally changed. Certainly Europe has been fundamentally changed. From Europe's energy security, which has been transformed and is being transformed in a matter of months, to Europe's defence, which is again going to be completely transformed. The Western order, the transatlantic alliance, tested, more unified than it has been in a very long time. And obviously, depending on the outcome of this war, looking very, very different. But I think more broadly, globalization fundamentally changed for several reasons. Firstly, the imposition of an extraordinary array of sanctions, the use of economic weaponry of the most powerful sort, I think will have very long-lasting ramifications. Countries outside of the transatlantic looking at this, being very clearly impacted by it, whether it is through soaring energy prices, through an imminent food catastrophe, seeing the use of Western sanctions. In many ways, I think they feel this is a European war that they are being profoundly affected by. However, and I think this is a big however, it is worth remembering that outside the North Atlantic, so outside Europe and the United States, much of the rest of the world is not really on board. 2/3 of the world's people live in countries that are either neutral in this conflict or are in fact supporting Russia. And so the West is itself invigorated, but it has not yet made the case sufficiently to the rest of the world that the stakes here are stakes that matter for them. And I think that's really important. So the challenge, I think, will be for the West to match its own renewed sense of purpose and strength by convincing the rest of the world that they too have a stake in this and that a rules-based order is important across the world.
Before the war in Ukraine, Russia's army was seen as powerful, capable, modernized. What we have seen in Ukraine points to the opposite. And that isn't just important for the war itself and Russia's struggles in Ukraine. This will also have long-lasting effects on the way that the world sees Russia. Russian military power, Russian political power, diplomatic power, all of it has taken a huge hit. Russia is coming out of this war significantly weakened. Its economy is in serious trouble. Its diplomacy looks fumbling and inept. It hasn't been able to stop countries like Finland and Sweden from seeking membership in NATO. And that, I think, is a long-lasting piece of reputational damage to the Russian state. What Russia has done in Ukraine is to use its nuclear weapons as a kind of shield behind which to wage its war inside the country. And it is said to the West, if you intervene directly, if you get your forces involved and they get in our way, you will risk a conventional war that may escalate to nuclear weapons. And that has so far worked. Russia has used nuclear weapons to keep the West out of the conflict. And I think what that does is make nuclear weapons more important to global security than they have been in many years. And countries like China may be watching this for lessons, and they may be thinking, well, if we want to invade Taiwan, perhaps we can also use nuclear weapons as a shield to keep America and its allies out of that war and keep them from intervening. So I think that's going to be the lesson that many countries draw. The way in which nuclear weapons can still be used, not for war-fighting purposes or anything else, but as a kind of deterrent behind which you can conduct a military offensive.
There are a trio of effects that you can now see on the world economy, and some of them are unexpected, all of them are far-reaching. Start with the most short-term effect, which is that the war has amplify the inflation problem that was already rippling through the world economy. Because Russia's a big energy exporter and because Ukraine is a big exporter of some commodities, you've seen a huge price shock go through energy and commodity markets. And some people think it could even trigger a recession in the US as the Federal Reserve has to put its foot on the brakes harder to try and get inflation under control. The second big effect we can see 3 months in to the war in Ukraine is on supply chains, and that will take a year or two to become fully apparent. And companies once again have found themselves unable to fill shelves with products, struggling to find components, and their manufacturing processes in chaos. But the bottom line is this great redesign of globalization and global supply chains is now more fully underway as a result of the war. The final big change that's visible 3 months after the conflict began relates to sanctions. So Western governments have fired a bazooka at Russia's economy. They've tried to cut off its financial system, its central bank, and quite a lot of the trade Russia does with the outside world. The big implication of that relates to China. You can guarantee that China is putting together a more cohesive plan for protecting its financial system and economy from Western sanctions. That might actually end up being the single biggest economic implication of the war in Russia and Ukraine.
Well, the world has changed absolutely in a fundamental way, and I don't think we are through this story at all. I think we're in the first part. Russia has changed dramatically in this 3 months. It would have been very hard to imagine 3 months ago that some of Russia's best and brightest would have fled the country, would have to flee the country in days after the invasion of Ukraine, that all independent media would be shut down in Russia. I think it made Russian regime much more brittle. It speeded up the moment when we might see the collapse of this regime, and with it possibly further disintegration of Russia itself. We've also discovered that Ukraine, the country that many people thought was chaotic and corrupt and not quite a country, few people maybe could even point its borders on map, let alone history, has proved itself to be a genuinely viable and strong country that has come together, whose people have come together in an extraordinary way. And certainly nobody could imagine that the war would go on for 3 months, and that there is actually a possibility of Ukraine's victory.
Thank you for watching. For all our coverage on the war in Ukraine, please click on the link and don't forget to subscribe.